or leave it until I've done the intros. Welcome everyone, and welcome to our Inclusive Futures Book Club session. I'd just like to start off with an acknowledgement of country. So Griffith University acknowledges the people who are the traditional custodians of the land. We pay respects to the elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. If you're looking for captions today, we've just got an auto-generated option via Microsoft Teams. So to activate that, there are some dots to click on at the top of your screen. Then select language and speech and turn on live captions. We've planned our event around accessibility and inclusion and endeavoured to do the best we can. We realise we might not get it right all the time, and there may be things we've overlooked. However, we welcome your feedback. Please don't hesitate to ask our staff if there's something you require. So you can do that in the chat or via email to inclusivefutures@griffith.edu.au. Trouble. We are recording this, so we're planning to put it up on our YouTube channel. So if you don't want yourself recorded, turn off your camera. But you can still submit your questions. And just a bit about etiquette. So please set your audio to mute unless you're speaking. You don't have to use your camera. You can if you wish. Please type your questions in the chat window, or that would be preferable, or otherwise you could email them to inclusivefutures@griffith.edu.au if you'd like to ask an anonymous question. We'll have, so the format is going to be, I'm going to have a chat with our guest author, Ken, and then afterwards we'll leave time for an interactive Q&A session. Okay, so my name's Maretta Mann. I'm Strategic Development Manager for an initiative at Griffith University called Inclusive Futures Reimagining Disability. I should introduce myself as I'm a middle-aged woman, fair-skinned, shoulder-length hair, wearing red-rimmed glasses, and I'm your host. So Inclusive Futures is a research initiative with a goal to improve the lives of people with disability through research that is done in partnership with people with disability, government, industry, and community organisations. And we started this book club to share stories that explore disability in all its diversity and to promote awareness, reflection, and open discussion. I would like to thank a couple of team members, Rebecca Barker and Joanne Keck-Paminter, and they are always helping behind the scenes to make these events happen. Each book we read offers a unique perspective, and today we're lucky to be joined by Ken Brandt, author of Positive Vision, Enjoying the Adventures and Advantages of Poor Eyesight. So Ken is a speaker, author and advocate who brings humour and optimism to the experience of living with low vision. Born with poor eyesight, Ken has navigated life with creativity and resilience, turning what many would see as a limitation into a source of strength and storytelling. So, hello, Ken. I have just finished listening to your audiobook, as I mentioned earlier before we started recording. This is actually the first audiobook I've ever listened to, and I will definitely be listening to more. It's really lovely, and it was really nice that you're the one reading it as well, so I feel like I've got to know you already before today. Oh, and I've just got a slide there. So the audiobook and hardcover book are available at Amazon if you want to read more. But actually, I might stop sharing my slide so that we can then go back to just looking at us having a conversation. How do I do that? I'm not sure how to do that.
Yes, stop share button up the top, Maretta.
Yes,
there should be, if Microsoft didn't keep changing the program.
It's like, I don't, hang on, maybe I need to, oh, here we go. There is, you're right. It's in a different place to what I expected. Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay. How is that? All right. So, Ken, I thought we'd just go back to early in your life, start at the beginning. And so you were born in an interesting time, which really, I guess, influenced the trajectory and of things for you. So could you just talk about, the time that you were born and things that happened and sort of how that led to where you are today?
Sure. First, I'll mention one thing about the previous slide. You can definitely get the book, the ebook, or the audiobook on Amazon, but you could also get it almost every other place in the world that sells audiobooks, books, hardcovers, paperbacks, or audiobooks. So some people love Amazon, some people hate them. I'm agnostic.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, we don't want to be tied to one global corporate, do we? Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Back to your question. So Australian doctors actually in the early 50s, 1950s, figured out for the first time that if you have a premature baby and you give it too much oxygen, it'll go blind. But if you give it just enough oxygen to stay alive, but not too much, it will be able to see. So that discovery was made a couple of years before I was born. And the word hadn't really spread around that much. So a lot of places didn't know about it or were testing other theories or whatever. But I was totally, not due to anything I did, but totally lucky enough to be in one of the places that knew about that. And so I was born and they took care of me and I can see. Very crummy vision. I have very terrible vision, but I can see. And I'm very, very grateful for that. So I've had, like, my vision now is 6:30, which means what most people can see at 30 meters away, I need to be 6 meters away to see the same thing. So I have to be way, way closer. That's with my good eye. With my bad eye, it's twice as bad. So, but I feel very, very lucky because otherwise I literally wouldn't be able to see anything. And I've had lots of ups and downs. I've had variations of vision because I've had detached retina in each eye, a cataract operation in each eye. There's some other stuff. So my vision has gone up and down throughout my life, which, by itself causes some interesting experiences. So I'm used to it. But as I was growing up, because I was in that first cohort of people that nearsighted, none of my friends, teachers, peers, sports coaches, had known they didn't have anybody in their experience who was that nearsighted. So I tried most of my life to just, get away with as much as I could without telling anybody anything. But I sat near in the front row of the class most of the time to see the board. If I could see the board, a lot of times I'd be in the front row and I still couldn't see the board. It was back when they had blackboards, it's showing what a dinosaur I am. It's before screens and everything else. So that's my experience. So, but generally, I had a very, very, positive growing up experience, and was always taught to go for whatever I wanted to do. And that really made a big difference.
Mm. I think that's really interesting because we talk about disclosure of disability a lot here in Inclusive Futures, and the reasons why people might want to tell or not their employer or their friends about their disability. So have you had circumstances where you've felt that might really put you at a disadvantage, or other experiences where, it might have been a positive thing or just made no difference at all?
Well, I basically avoided discussing my vision my entire life until I wrote this book, and now I end up discussing it all the time. And a bunch of my friends really everybody who knows me knows like I'm nearsighted. And also because my eyes are slightly crossed all the time, and more so when I'm tired, they know something is amiss. And it's, everybody always says, look everybody straight in the eye when you talk to them, which I always do, but the person I'm looking at can't tell. So it doesn't really do that much good, but I do it anyway. And so they know, something is amiss, but most people don't ask anything, and I don't bring it up. In terms of employment, I did lose one job because I was nearsighted. I was an apprentice for the sheet metal workers union, and in New York City. I'm from New York, lived most of my life in New York, but for the last 20 years, my wife and I have been living in Melbourne. My accent and her accent have not moved a millimeter. We still sound like we're from New York. We don't sound like we're from Australia at all. We thought that might rub off on us, but it hasn't so far. Anyway, so I'm in New York. I was briefly an apprentice in the sheet metal workers union. And sheet metal workers, they make ducts. So the metal things that you use for heating and air conditioning. So the hot air goes through, or the cold air goes through, and it goes into the rooms. So I really liked that. It was really fun. Part of the work was in the shop where we actually made the ducts, and part of the work was in the places where we were installing the ducts. And then part of the, like once every 2 weeks or something, you go to a class to learn about, how to do all this stuff. So in the class, the leader of the class said, well, you need to get a note from your eye doctor saying you see well enough to do this work. So I thought to myself, all right, that should be no problem. I'm doing this and it seems to be working fine. And I really like doing it. But my eye doctor said, no, you can't do that. You're going up and down ladders. You're doing all kinds of stuff. You shouldn't do that. And so he wouldn't give it to me. So I ended up having to drop out of that, which was disappointing. I'll go off on a tangent just a sec to tell you one story. So one of the places I put in ducts was in the very top of the World Trade Center, back when there was a World Trade Center. It wasn't while it was being constructed. It was renovation work on the restaurant above, at the top of the World Trade Center. They were redoing the whole thing. So one of the things that I was working on, there was an exhaust duct that went out into the air. So we're not like 110 stories up, and somebody has to go out into this duct and fix something at the very end outside, right? So we got up on the ladder, and I crawl into the duct, and my mate is holding onto my leg so I don't fall out. So I go all the way out, and it was a really great view. You can see down 110 floors, but it was the winter, and it's freezing, and the wind is blowing in, and all the other trades in back of us start yelling, what are you doing? Close the door. Stop doing that. It's freezing in here now. And the guy, my mate turns around and goes, well, one of us is out there. We have to just do this for a while. And they go, somebody's out there, which was me. So I fixed the thing and came back in. And, that was exciting. But I had to stop doing that. So I ended up, after a couple of years, switching into information technology, then cybersecurity, and did that. And for any job interview, I never mentioned anything about having poor vision. Where possible, I got a larger screen and just said that would be helpful, and they gave it to me. A couple of times I was asked to drive somewhere, rent a car and go somewhere, and I can't do that because even though in some extremely remote places I've driven, which I thought was a lot of fun, but it's basically a really, really bad idea for me to be driving for society. There'd be dead people all over the place. I would just, I just wouldn't notice them. So only in extreme uninhabited places have I driven. So anyway, I don't mention that. And if I'm asked to drive somewhere, then I tell my boss, I don't have a license and I can't get one. And if you want me to, if that turns out to be a criteria, I'm happy to just resign. I understand it didn't come up in any of the interview processes. And the couple of times that happened, they said, oh, no, don't. They were very adamant, don't resign, which was good because I liked my jobs. And that was about it. So I generally did the opposite of what I think you're recommending, which is I avoided the whole subject.
Oh, I'm not recommending anything.
Okay.
I'm just, really interested in your experience, and there could certainly be some questions about this. When we get to the Q&A.
Sure.
It's really interesting how people approach this. So actually on the topic of driving, how has that shaped your experience of independence and mobility?
Well, it makes a giant difference in figuring out where you're going to live. So you want to live in a place where ideally, you can walk to everything you need, to grocery stores, and there's mass transit of, in the case of Melbourne, trams or trains or buses, or in the case of New York City, subways and buses and trains, where you can pretty much easily get anywhere in the metropolitan area. Now with Uber, it's even easier. If you have to, you can spend more money, and so there are places I think are beautiful and wonderful to visit, like remote parts of Australia and America and other places. I love them, but I just couldn't live there. It would be impossible. It'd be 100% dependent on other people to get everywhere.
That's really fascinating. When we talk about some developing research projects about and that topic comes up a lot, actually, about how accessible transport is so much more difficult in regional and remote areas.
Well, and you don't have to go too regional either. You go just a little ways out in the suburbs of most places. And if you want to go into the city and back out, you're okay. But if you want to go almost anywhere else, it's very difficult. Yeah.
Yep.
I have high hopes based on no inside knowledge whatsoever, just reading general articles of, autonomous driving, autonomous vehicles where you can just jump in and, I want to go blah, blah, blah. And, the car will just take you. So, I think that's going to happen in my lifetime. That, it's being tested all over the place, and that'll make a huge difference for me and many other people.
Yeah, love it. Move on to another topic. So social activities. You had quite what I thought was quite many hilarious stories actually in your book, but one was about your experience in restaurants, or more just how you. I guess I found humorous about how you approach these things, often in sort of a creative and a very positive way. So if you go to a restaurant where it might be a bit dark and you can't read the menu, yeah. Do you want to describe that?
That actually happens a lot, partly because of darkness in some restaurants, but also, a lot of menus are designed by people who like must have perfect vision. The colors and the print and the contrast between the page and the print. It's like they're just doing everything they can to make it hard to read, and the print is small. Anyway, if you get in one of those places, what I have sort of two strategies, and both of them end up sometimes in having you order something that you've never had before but sounds really interesting. One is you just, if you're in some place and there's something that you've heard of that's a specialty to that town or city, just like order that, whether you've ever had it or not, and whether you know what it is or not either. It's then the other is go guess for what the general fit might be. Like if you're in a breakfast someplace for breakfast, almost everywhere in the world you can say, I'll have eggs, or you can have, if you're in Australia, almost everywhere you can say chicken parma. If you're in the US, you can almost everywhere say I'll have a burger. If you're in an Italian restaurant, you can say, pizza or lasagna or whatever. So things like that, you can pretty much get it. Or third, which is also pretty interesting, is when you have no idea what the menu says, so you just ask the waiter or waitress. You go, well, what's the most popular thing, or what do you think is the best, or that kind of, what do you think you get the most value from, or what's your smallest meal or your biggest meal, whatever it is. And you have, usually they think that's an interesting question, and you have a brief conversation, and they might suggest a couple things, and then you just pick one of them. So, and the same thing works with whatever you're going to drink. If you're at a place where you might have a wine or a beer, there, you ask, right, what do you think goes, after you figure out what you're eating, what do you think goes best with this that you have? And they're usually very happy to like give you their opinion about that stuff. And boom, you're off and away. You never have to say, I find your menu very annoying, I can't read it at all. You never have to say anything like that. You just go with the conversation.
Very diplomatic, yeah, and I love your
and fun, because you try stuff. You try stuff that sometimes you'd never even heard of. Right?
That's great. Yeah, other stories in your book. So you've had quite a lot of misadventures. Do you want to, for anyone who hasn't read your book, do you want to give them a taster of a misadventure that you've had, either that you described in the book or that you've had since then, since writing it?
Sure. I tend to think of them as adventures as opposed to misadventures,
okay.
But I can understand. I can understand that thought. So this goes back a little bit to driving. So I'm pretty nearsighted, but I jog and run and walk a lot, and that's pretty much no problem. Sometimes I think if you're really have poor vision, it might actually help your balance, because if you're walking along and you can't really see exactly, is that a bump or an indentation in the footpath, or is that a little oil slick, or is that ice, or is that, like, what is that exactly? You might not see it, or you might not be sure what it is, yet you walk along anyway because you're going, and it might be a little deeper, might be a little higher, might be whatever, but you've got a balance with each of those steps. So I think that's sort of an advantage of poor eyesight. Oh, I should wait. I'm going to get back to your question, but I should mention somewhere in this that, even though I talk about the advantages of poor eyesight and think they're fun and people should be aware of them, I am not saying poor eyesight is better than good eyesight. I think everybody should do, whatever their eye doctors and doctors say about their eyes, with protection and, wear sunglasses, wear safety glasses when you're doing something that needs it. Do all, go for checkups, work out, eat healthy, do all the stuff you can. But at a certain point, your eyes are going to be at whatever their maximum sight is, which might be great or might be crummy. But whatever it is, just be grateful you have it. And then move on. Whatever you decide to do, give it a red hot go and just go for it. So I'm not saying poor vision is better than good vision. So anyway, I like walking, jogging, all of that stuff. I like bicycling, but I can easily, I'm not saying I'm a great bicyclist, but I can easily go way faster on the bicycle than I can see bumps and dips and stuff coming up. So I have to bicycle pretty slowly, and I'm not as excited about doing that. But then when I was in university, I had an opportunity to go parachuting, and I thought, wow, this is perfect. There's no bumps, there's no turns. You're just in the air. You're going really fast. I like going fast. That seemed really fun. So I signed up for parachuting, and two of my friends and I joined a bunch of people. I was going to school, university in Washington, D.C. in America, and Maryland is a state right next to there. And there's a town called Downsville, Maryland, where they were giving parachuting lessons. So that by itself, I still think is hysterical. I took parachuting lessons in Downsville, Maryland. That's the real name of the town. So you learn all this stuff. You learn how to how the parachute works, how to steer it. You practice jumping off a little box, and then you practice jumping off that's made, the little box is maybe less than a meter. Then you get on a box that's like almost 6 meters, and you practice jumping off of that and rolling and jumping off with your eyes closed and falling different ways. So all of that is to make the landing, when you're landing with a parachute, as pain-free as possible. And you really get good at that. And I think I've never had to use this, but if I was in a burning building and I had to jump out the window, I feel like that would be a useful skill. So anyway, I go up in the plane, and it's a little tiny plane. There's the pilot, and then there's only room for like 3 or 4 people, including the instructor, because you take up a lot of space. You've got your big parachute in back. You've got a reserve parachute in front of you. Each person takes up a lot of space. So we get in this plane, and I didn't really notice till we got going, but there's a place where there would normally be a door, but there's no door. There's just a space. So there's this big opening, and I'm sitting, like this far away from the opening. And I was a little nervous just going up in the air in the plane because, all right, I wanted to parachute, but I didn't necessarily want to fall out of the plane as the start of my parachuting. So then we get to the right spot in the air, and it's my turn. So it was not at all like in the movies when you had to crawl out of the plane. So the plane is flying, right? You're flying. The air is blowing past you. The engine is roaring. You're in the middle of the sky. You crawl out, and you put your feet on this metal bar that's between the plane and the wheels of the plane. And you put your hands on this other metal bar that's under the wing. So you're holding on for dear life, right? You're hanging on. Now you're flying. You're standing outside the plane flying. And then you see the instructor go, of course you can't hear him. You're outside, the wind is blowing, the engine is roaring, but you know what he's saying. He's saying jump. So after holding on for your dear life, you go, wah, and you jump up and backwards. And then you just watch, and the plane is going very far away. And you're by yourself, and you're connected. There's a cord, your first 3 jumps, there's a cord between you and the plane. So that's supposed to pull out your parachute. But you've learned that you need to count for so many seconds, because if your parachute doesn't open, you need to open your backup parachute. But you're also told, do not open it too soon, because if both parachutes open, they'll get all tangled up, and then neither of them will work, and you're really in a lot of trouble. You'll just crash down to the earth. So you can't help but thinking about all this stuff. So unlike now, when I'm totally relaxed, like counting for 5 seconds or whatever it was, I could easily do that. But when falling through the air really fast, plummeting towards the earth, counting somehow seems more difficult, and judging how fast you're counting, it seems impossible. So I'm debating and debating. Should I open? Should I open? Should I open? Should I open? And then all of a sudden your parachute opens, and it is possibly the most glorious feeling you can ever have in your life when your parachute opens, because you go, okay, good, I'm not going to die. That's really good. That's really good. And then you have the fun of floating down, and you're looking at all this stuff all over the place. And it was a rural area, and it was mostly farms and everything. And then for the first time, I realized, I should have probably thought about this a little bit, but I hadn't. Am I going to be able to see the place I'm supposed to land? And I'm looking around and I go, I have no idea. I know it's supposed to be back at the airport. I know there's a whole bunch of people. I don't see any of that stuff. So I'm looking around, and then I realize, okay, every place is green except for a nearby highway and this one dirt place. So I figured the dirt rectangle, that must be the one I'm aiming for. So I aim for that. I get way, 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 way closer. And I realize, okay, this is it. This is where the little tiny airport is. And there's a circle of people. So I realized that's what I'm supposed to aim for. I'm in the middle of the circle, which I can't see yet, is basically something the size of a Frisbee. And that's the target in competitive parachuting. You're supposed to aim, get as close to that Frisbee as possible when you land. So I go, all right, I'm going for it. So you're steering the parachute, which means you're pulling openings in it. It goes, turns or goes faster, and you're trying to figure out the wind and where are you going. So that whole thing was very exciting. And I came in when I finally got close enough to the people, then I could eventually see the Frisbee, but it was right in the middle. So I knew where I was going anyway. So, and I came pretty close. I was very proud of myself. That was good. I was, skidding in and it was fun. So then the next thing I had to do was, they said, well, do you want to go again? And out of our group of like 40 or something, most people did not want to go again. They said, that was it. That was terrifying enough. I'm never doing this again in my life. But I and some other people were the opposite. Yes, I want to go as many times as possible. This is great. So then you have two options. You can use a parachute that they packed for you, or you can pack your own parachute. I said, well, I want to pack my own parachute. If I'm going to do this a bunch of times, I want to know how to do it. If I'm taking my life in my hands, I want to take it in my hands. Let me figure out how to do this. So they teach you how to do it. And what it involves is you take your parachute, you spread it out over a field, and then the wind is blowing. So you need to put rocks from the field all over your parachute to hold it down. And then you go to one side and you throw the rocks away and you fold up the parachute the way you're supposed to. So I go through all of that, and I think I did just a bang up job. And the second time I go up, it was like the first time, except when my parachute opened, the next thing I know, and luckily you're wearing a motorcycle helmet when you parachute. The next thing I know, I missed hundreds of rocks, and they're just like bam, 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 bam. So luckily I have a motorcycle helmet on wearing it, and then none of them were really big, but it was pretty surprising. And then I'm thinking, oh, what's below me? And I didn't see anybody, but maybe somebody was there, but I never heard any complaints or questions or injuries or anything. So I don't think any of those rocks hit anybody but me, but it was pretty surprising. So I land, and I realized I need to do a much better job of throwing the rocks out the next time. Very sadly, somebody else went who was doing it for the first time, and she was not paying attention to the directions of how to steer, and she really panicked, and she was going straight down onto a highway. She was right on above the highway, going with the highway, and her mouth was wide open. We think she was maybe screaming and yelling, and the guy with the bullhorn was yelling up, no, turn, just pull with one arm, let go, like, giving her all these directions, but she ignored all of that. She hit a power line, bounced off that, landed on the highway. Miraculously, a great, really great truck driver, somehow saw her coming, swerved, blocked off the whole highway so nobody hit her with their car or truck. But she was in the hospital. She had to go to the hospital. There was an ambulance. We did a collection for her. She had she was a waitress, no medical insurance. It was not like Australia. And, so that was very tough. Nevertheless, I went up on my third jump. I did much better, only a very, very few rocks. So that was good. And I each time came pretty close to the Frisbee-sized target. So I was made the captain of my university parachuting team, which was really fun. But then later I found out that my eye doctor said, well, if you've had a detached retina, it's real, and I'd had a detached retina earlier in my life in both eyes, then you need to really not do parachuting, because if you have a giant knock on the head, you could detach it again. So I very reluctantly gave up parachuting, but I enjoyed it a lot, and I recommend it to everybody who has not had a detached retina. Many people think this recommendation is ridiculous and they will never do it, but a few people have and really liked it. So that was pretty fun.
That's an amazing description. I don't feel any need myself to parachuting. I don't really have a need to do adrenaline sports or anything that involves heights, but I feel like I have experienced it through just listening to your amazing story.
Yeah.
And I do have
a lot of over the years I've been in lots of over the years I've been in lots of business meetings where, like, it's some big thing and somebody raises topics related to risk. And I was in information security for a long time, which is very oriented towards evaluating risk and figuring out what the risks are and everything else. And so somebody would say, all right, well, who has anybody in here ever parachuted? And, a few people would stand up, and most of the time they were in one of those situations where, you're tied to somebody else. You're not parachuting by yourself. You're like strapped in, and the other person does all the work, really. And they were, and that's great. That's a way to do it. But then I would stand up and say that I was the captain of my university parachuting team, and they would, like, sometimes in some instances, I thought that might have lost me my job right away, but that never happened. So that was good.
A great practical training in risk management, I suppose. Yes.
Exactly.
Hands-on experience. Yeah. Thanks, Ken. Yeah, they're incredible stories. Maybe we'll move. It'd be good to leave a bit of time for questions.
Yep.
But I would like to ask you what inspired you to write the book, and also I think you described an intention to write another book, so which might involve some volunteers. So are you still working on that? Oh, that's a double question, though.
Well, in answer to the first one, I had, like the parachuting story and a bunch of other stories in the book. I just had a bunch of stories that people really liked hearing over coffee or beers or something. And I thought, well, maybe I should write all these down. And then after that, I thought, well, maybe I should include like the whole vision angle in this, and also talk about advantages of poor vision, which I think, as far as I know, nobody else talks about, but I think everybody should talk about. So I wrote the book, and it was during the pandemic when I wrote the book. So it was the perfect, like, heads down solitary activity, because you couldn't go anywhere. And in Melbourne, even more so than most places, I think more so than most, we had more lockdown days than anywhere else in the world. So, there was plenty of time to be alone and write. So that turned out to be pretty good. So that was why I wrote it, and I'm glad I did. It's very rewarding, and well, financially, the whole thing, the amount of time I spent writing it, and versus how little money came out of the book, it was colossally a financial disaster. But I don't care. It didn't actually lose money, but in terms of like making money, it was like nothing. So, but what's really enjoyable is I still get like comments and emails and people saying stuff where like, I thought it was hysterical, or I never thought about the advantages, or my aunt or niece or nephew or something, is really nearsighted, and this book helped me understand their situation. It all makes you feel better.
Yeah, I'm sure that's, well, it is. We certainly find that from reading books. It's just so interesting to hear personal experiences.
In terms of, I have not gotten around to starting to write another book, so I keep thinking I might, but I don't know. I'm doing other stuff, and I should. I have notes and stuff, but I haven't actually sat down to get going. It's not that I hope there's another pandemic, so I have a lot of isolated time. So, but I should. Yeah.
I think a lot of books must have been written, especially in Melbourne, during the pandemic. It must have been, yeah.
It's much better than going crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. Shall we open up to some questions? And I see there's some coming through on the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great. I hope somebody asks about the advantages of poor vision at some point, but let's see what they're asking.
Well, I would say the first one is along those lines. So Joanne from our team. So you met Joanne earlier on, and, she has a hearing impairment. So she says, we've both experienced the world in unique ways, you with low vision, me with hearing impairment. What's one thing your disability has taught you about turning challenges into opportunities that you'd want everyone to know?
Well, I'll answer that in two parts. First, the difference, there's similarities, but there's also just a big difference in how people treat you if you're nearsighted versus you have difficulty hearing. And I feel lucky being on the nearsighted poor vision side, because basically no one gets mad at you if you can't see something. You just say, I can't see it, I need to be closer. Or I can't see it, could you tell me what that says? And everybody does. But people who are hard of hearing, people just yell at them. They somehow get angry. Nobody gets angry at you for not seeing well. So I think that stinks. People should just be nicer. Anyway, challenges. I think you just have to be able to laugh at yourself. That's the critical thing. I think there's a bunch of advantages to poor vision, and one of them is, I think you live longer because you're in slightly better shape than you would otherwise. Like you're walking somewhere and you don't necessarily, you're crossing a field or you're going through a building, and maybe there's a shortcut, or maybe you think there's a shortcut, but the door is somewhere else, or the fence doesn't end where you think it's going to end. So you end up walking farther. So you end up doing this over and over again, and you end up so you end up walking farther, which is healthy, and you end up being in better shape. So there you go. You probably live longer, maybe because you can't see as well, and the other part of it is, if you laugh at those things, you're better off healthily in terms of health and social well-being. If you do it and you think it's funny, okay, you are going to live longer, unless you get angry at it, but why do that? Or I think also, if you have, and this applies to having difficulty hearing as well as seeing, is I think you live longer because you're more inclined to read about and learn about, eyesight or hearing. And then right next to articles about eyesight and hearing and improving things are always articles and blogs and books and stuff about general health and the benefits of getting in shape. They're always next to each other. So you end up accidentally reading more of those and maybe getting interested in them, and you end up being healthier because you're paying attention to some of that stuff too. So
Right.
I
So
think
those
you can live longer.
Those algorithms might go in your favor.
Exactly.
Oh, brilliant. You have such a great attitude to life. Next question from Vicky. Have you ever experienced Charles Bonnet syndrome visual hallucinations?
Since I have no idea what that is, I would have to say no.
Vicky, oh, I see you've put your camera on. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, hi everyone. Hi Ken.
Hey.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for talking. It's great to hear your experiences. Yeah, Charles Bonnet
Thanks for
syndrome.
listening.
Oh, yeah, cool. The Charles Bonnet syndrome, it's for people when people have sight loss, the brain fills in the missing bits of information with they're called pseudo hallucinations. And they're not real hallucinations. They're just the brain filling in the missing bits of information, and they can be really simple, like geometric shapes, or they can be really complex, animals or people or anything really. And up to like 1 in 6 people get them with sight loss. So
I don't know if this counts, but I think it's one of the advantages of low sight is creativity, because you have to, you see as well as you can see, but you still can't figure out a lot of times at a distance or sometimes even close, depending on what you're looking at, exactly what are you looking at. So your brain is doing all this work trying to figure that out. And you have to be, somehow subconsciously creative about, figuring out what that is you're looking at. And, sometimes you get closer and go, all right, well, that was completely wrong, or even sometimes you're very close and you go to, pat your cat or dog, and then you realize, that's a sweater that you left on the chair. Stuff happens like that all the time. And it, again, I think it, when it, I don't necessarily tell anybody I'm next to when that happens, but I do laugh, and sometimes I tell them, I think it can be pretty funny, so long as it's not. I've never been in a situation where that's proved dangerous.
Yeah,
I don't know whether I just completely evaded that question or answered it.
Yeah, thanks. It's interesting. I think a lot of I'm doing a PhD at the moment about them, and I've got lived experience because I was losing my eyesight, and so I had these hallucinations. But I had a brain aneurysm, and they fixed it. So
Great.
I'm very fortunate. So I only get very mild problems with my sight now compared to what it used to be. But a lot of people that do have these Charles Bonnet hallucinations are too frightened to talk about it because of the stigma attached to hallucinating. But but a lot of people find them very funny or happy or just interesting.
Well, it depends whether you view it as creativity or a delusion, I guess. I don't know. It's, eventually you figure out what it is. I went one time. I was on my cousin's ranch in Montana, and we're like herding cattle, and in the distance he sees this black animal, and says, that could be a bear. And I can just see a spot. I can't tell. But we ride closer, and it's this forest area, you know, so there's all these trees in the way and everything else. And then we get much closer, and then he figured this out way before I did, but he goes, oh, no, that's not a black bear. That's just a black cow, right?
Yeah.
That happens. I'll tell you one that's sort of the reverse of that, which is I had a cataract operation in one eye and then in the other eye. When you have a cataract, your vision goes slowly, very, very, very slowly, worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And then when you have the operation, which is getting rid of the cloudy lens in your eye and replacing it with a plastic clear lens, all of a sudden in that eye, you see way, way better. And it's like instant, you know, like take the bandage off and boom, you're seeing way better than you did the day before. You're not seeing better than you did before you got the cataract, but that was so long ago, you don't even really remember that. So that happened in one eye, right? So I was so excited. And then I went around and some people think what I did was in bad taste. So take this with a grain of salt, and, you know, I hope nobody's insulted here. Some men are insulted by this and some women are insulted by this. It's very interesting. So I went around to every guy I knew, every single guy, handsome, ugly, relatives, friends, work associates, tall, skinny, fat, whatever, every single person, all races, right? And I said to every guy, I go, well, you know, and everybody was happy for me because I could see better, right? And I said, well, you know, now that I can see better, I realized, I said this to every guy, you know, you're a little uglier than I thought. And every single guy, 100% goes, oh, yeah, all right, yeah. They all agreed and shuffled down a little bit, right? And to every single woman, same thing. Beautiful, ugly, tall, short, skinny, fat, all ages, all weights, everything, right? I said, you know, now that I can see better, you're even more beautiful than I thought. And every single one goes, oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah. It was universal. So then a couple of years later, I had a cataract in the other eye. I had the same operation, and I repeated the whole thing again, and the same thing happened. It was just an amazing social experiment, you know.
It's like unique perspective on the world. Actually, I think our next question had some elements of that. So from Brit, she says, this was great. I was wondering, what advice would you give to someone who's recently acquired a disability and is navigating a new reality? And then added, could you share an example when your disability gave you a unique perspective? Or you possibly have done that.
Well, you know, first I'm lucky. I having poor vision is my only disability, so I can, you know, I don't know how broadly I can speak, but I think that the key is, you know, do everything you can for your health and do whatever you need to do to help your disability. In my case, it's like go to the eye doctors regularly and go to a regular doctor regularly and eat right and work out and do stuff like that. So as close as you can do that in parallel to what I did, you know, great. But then don't let it stop you. You know, like whatever you want to do, just go for it. Give it a red hot go. And, you know, if you succeed, great. If you don't, well, you know, laugh and figure out something else to do. You know, it's don't limit yourself. Don't let it limit you. You can almost always figure out a way to do whatever you want. And it might turn out that you're not good at it. That happens. You know, there's some skills I wish I was better at, but they have nothing to do with sight. But go for it. You know, just to enjoy it, and don't let anybody tell you can't do anything.
Yeah. And I think did you say in the book that your mother was very much like that?
Yes, it's very lucky. I dedicated the book to my mom. My father died when I was 10 or so, and so she raised my brother and I. And it just like never came up in my upbringing that, don't consider doing this, don't consider doing that, don't, it's whatever activity I wanted to do, she would encourage it, which was perfect. And and I didn't realize till getting much older that lots of kids are not brought up that way. They have some vision impairment or other disability, and it turns out like their entire life, their parents and relatives are all saying, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. And it's like, that's ridiculous, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Really
and
good advice.
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, and I think society can do that as well, can't we? Like, we have to protect the people with disability, without like letting people make their own choices and take their own risks.
And you stifle them, and they're going to be they're going to be out of shape because they're not running around trying stuff.
I think we're just about at time. Maybe I'll do one more question.
I'll tell you another story.
Okay, why not? There is, I'll just tell you, there's a bit of a chat,
ahead.
I think, there's a bit of a discussion in the chat about people with disability as superheroes and how that sometimes could be a good thing, but sometimes it's condescending to call people, with disability a superhero. Yeah, they're just being themselves. I hopefully have summarised that.
I agree with that completely. It's ridiculous to call somebody for doing, normal stuff a superhero. I think it's ridiculous. But people, it's expression inflation. Like people think there's, I think a hero is somebody who truly risks themselves to do something good for others. It's not at all related to any disability or disadvantage.
Yep. Thank you, Ken. I'm thinking we should perhaps wrap up. Is that okay? Although I feel like we could talk for another hour.
It's up to you.
I'd really love, Maretta, to hear the answer to Joe's final question.
Oh, excellent.
I think it's a really useful one. Can we do that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Ken, by the way, this is Elizabeth, the director of our Inclusive Futures Initiative. So Joe's final question. In many meetings now, people are introducing themselves and given a brief visual description for those with low vision or blindness. From your perspective, is this a genuinely helpful practice? And what makes a description most useful? Yeah, that is a great question, Joe.
No, I think it's a good idea. I especially like it when I'm looking at somebody's picture and then they describe themselves and I go, oh, really? Your hair is red? I thought it was brown, or you wear this different, so and then people say usually something roughly related to their age, and I'm going, I would have guessed something else. So I think those are helpful. I could do one of those if you want. So all right, I'm 70. I am, I've been balding for many years, but I have some hair, which I shave very closely on my head. I have a mustache. I'm wearing a blue shirt. And my eyes are slightly crossed.
Okay, thank you. That is very helpful. Okay, well, thank you so much, Ken. That was very enjoyable having this discussion, and I hope everyone here got something out of it as well. If there are questions left unanswered, would you be happy, Ken, if I sent them in an email to you? Because I may have possibly missed some out.
I'd be very happy to answer questions by email, or if anybody wants to contact me via LinkedIn or Facebook and just ask me a question directly, I'd be happy to have a conversation with them or answer their question.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your time, and yeah, wish you all the best, and maybe we'll be in touch again.
Okay, thank you, everybody, and have a good afternoon.
Bye, Ken.
Thank you.
That's
Thanks,
really great.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so